Welcome to another edition of Eye on the Issues. Today we're talking with Natrona County Coroner James Whipps. Sir, thank you for joining us. And I know there's been some talk about the suicide rate out in your county. It's high. There's been an article in Cowboy State Daily that I've read recently. Talk to me about what's different this year than in years past, if you don't mind.
Actually, nothing is really different other than we've always been high, and right now to start the year, we're spiking to set yet another record year here.
And let's talk about why you think this is happening. Can you give me your analysis at least?
You know, I can't tell you why it's so high in Wyoming and this county. There's been so much research done, everything from altitude to the cowboy pull yourself up by your bootstraps attitude to the wind. I mean, you name it, and nobody's been able to put a specific finger on it. But you know what? One thing that is kind of, I guess, most recent is my research into trying to determine the root of a lot of this. And what I'm finding is that this goes back into adolescence kind of as a starting point, especially in young adults. When I see those suicides, it's easy to try and research back, whether it's through the medical record or through interviews or whatever, and see where our youth somehow, some way have lost or not being taught properly, you know, the resiliency and coping skills needed to handle these problems in life, and it's just carrying forward into adulthood.
And when it comes to the impact drugs may have on this and the suicide rate, how would you correlate that in terms of the number of the suicides that had some kind of drugs in their system?
Well, number one, I don't test every single suicide toxicology wise. I will if there's some sort of suspicion on scene that something like that was taking place. And when I do, you know, I would bet probably 90% of the time I'm finding either drugs or alcohol in the system. However, it's hard to show, and we can in some cases when we go back and kind of research it, that this is an ongoing problem, or was it a one-time deal to numb themselves to the suicide? You know, and it's really kind of a 50-50 split there when it comes to that. But there is a lot of drug and alcohol abuse, you know, especially when you get into adulthood, that you can trace back and say, yes, this definitely was probably part of the problem.
Suicides destroy lives. Obviously, the person that is gone, the family left behind. This is really a big deal that the people of Wyoming really need to pay attention to, wouldn't you say?
Well, absolutely. And, you know, I hate to say it, but it's almost like the community as a whole has taken on the attitude of, this is the way it's always been, this is the way it is, this is the way it'll always be, and kind of become numb to it, just because we see so much of it. And that is really what we're trying to change right now, and especially, again, with the adolescent population, whether it's going to the school board or I'm on the suicide prevention task force, really going out and trying to hit that hard right now in the hopes that prevention young will be prevention later on in life, and actually reduce my caseload, you know, in the young adult years if we can catch it in the youth.
And as you mentioned, speaking of the school board, I know you spoke to the school board about this, try to wake them up a little bit. Can you give us an idea of your message?
Well, for the most part, my piece to them was a lot of throwing out statistics, especially statistics that are specific to this county, and being able to show them that number one, this is a problem, and number two, it does directly correlate to our adolescence, and kind of shake the tree, because the task force has been talking to the school board for a long time, and it I can't say that it's brought about any real change. And so that's what we're really trying to hook here is getting programs into the schools that educate not just the teachers on how to react, but the students, again, on this resiliency and coping stuff, and building those skills so they can handle these problems when they come up.
From a community-wide standpoint, are you getting a sense as to the level of drug use among younger kids? I'm just curious, do you have any idea? Is it going up? Do we have any sense as to what's happening and how that the mental state of how people progress once they start using something could lead to something like this?
Well, I can't tell you the breakdown between youth and adults, but I can tell you that number one, our overdose deaths have exploded this year, right along with the suicides. And I'm a participant of what they call OD math, which allows me to basically sit here and map not just the overdose, suspected overdose and fatal overdoses in my county, but statewide, nationwide. And in 2023, the number of suspected overdoses, in other words, ones that weren't fatal but were reported, whether it's by EMS, law enforcement, hospitals, whatever, nearly doubled in 2023. And that trend is continuing right now in 2024. I have so far this year 11 overdose deaths in the first, well, not even 5 months of the year, where in an average year, I'm looking at 15 to 17 year long. So if you extrapolate that out, you can see that yeah, this, we're critical mass, we have a problem. So if this keeps going, this trend the rest of the year, we'll set a record there as well. And our fatal overdoses here really tend to be illicit overdoses, and primarily methamphetamine. Mm-hmm. You hear a lot about the fentanyl issue and that stuff around the country. But at least here, as far as deaths are concerned, fentanyl may be a contributing factor, but the primary deal is methamphetamine. And the reason behind that is that fentanyl and opioids obviously will react to Narcan and those kind of things, whereas methamphetamine will not. So we do a good job of saving people up front via Narcan and that kind of intervention, and the methamphetamines will be the ones that kill them.
In respect to the overdoses, are they exclusively the younger crowd of 20 and under, or not?
No, as far as the fatal overdoses, I've got them across the spectrum. And I don't see a lot of juvenile deaths, especially when it comes to overdoses. It's more when they get into adulthood. Not to say that the drugs aren't being abused in youth, but obviously as it goes out over time, it becomes heavier, more dependent, and worse. So I tend to see that in young adults. But I got to tell you, I'm seeing methamphetamine overdoses in the 70s, even I think maybe one in the 80s. So it goes across the spectrum.
So you said you're at 11 for overdoses. Where are you at right now for suicides? I think 13 was the last number I saw, but is it higher?
Actually, I just saw a juvenile suicide last night. So that brings that, I believe, to 14 for the year.
Can I ask you what age?
It was 15.
Oh, how heartbreaking.
It is
So,
considered, this is what I've been trying to get community action on, again, as youth. And when you take a look at the number of completed youth suicides since 2019, I'm only sitting on 8, which is a percentage of that big number that we have. But again, I can take these young adults and what have you and trace it back to the adolescence. And, lo and behold, when I start raising the red flag, what do we have but a youth suicide?
So let me ask you this. I know you're not a counselor and whatnot, but you understand the process. What kind of message do we need to get out to parents out there to put up the red flag and say, hey, if you see such and such, you may want to pay extra attention and make sure that everything's okay?
Well, and that's really what it comes down to. Not that the community doesn't care, but the community needs to be, number one, have their eyes open, and number two, be educated. And we have so many groups, so many trainings, so many everything that can clue people into this. It's just a matter of getting it out there and getting them to recognize the problem as a whole and get involved and actually and get that education.
And off the top of your head, is there a website or somewhere parents can go to kind of just stay informed about what's hot, what's trending, what's what they can do to really protect their kids?
Yeah, now, and there's all kinds of national ones, state ones. I mean, it's crazy, but in my county specifically, we have the Natrona County Suicide Prevention Task Force as a website with all of the resources and different things that people could get involved in, whether it's pre-suicide or post-suicide. We're all about taking care of the family after the fact as well. And then also, I keep on my website, on the Natrona County website, under the coroner section, all the statistics going back for years that can show you trends and drugs involved and everything. I mean, I keep pretty good statistics that'll allow people to see, what age groups are currently being involved, sexes, whether they're married, have a job. I mean, all of it. So.
Is your sense at all that this has gone up and started to go up since the lockdowns and since COVID, or is that not even an issue in your opinion?
It is not, and I'll tell you why. During COVID, our suicide rate actually dropped, and especially during the lockdown, I mean, it darn became non-existent. And I'm going to put that to the fact that everybody was locked in together, watching each other. They're right next to each other and taking care of each other. And, funny thing is that at least when this county left the lockdown, I believe it was like on a Friday, that Saturday, I saw the first suicide in a long time. So, I mean, the minute everybody went out and spread their wings, lo and behold, we were right back in it. And it just speaks to the fact that when people are watching out for each other and looking for signs and symptoms and have that personal involvement, I mean, that's intervention right there. And a lot of times, if we can intervene, we can stop it.
And I know you said you don't always do drug testing and suicides for sure, but obviously the overdoses. When it comes to whether it be fentanyl, marijuana, cocaine, can you give me some sense of what kind of drugs you're seeing used out there when you do your testing?
Primarily, again, it's methamphetamine. We do have some fentanyl. And then a lot of it might be prescription drugs such as benzodiazepines and the antidepressants. And Shoot, I've even seen overdoses on xylazine, not xylazine, but Kratom. And that's something that's sold in our herbal shops, but you can actually overdose on that if you abuse it. You know, so it's kind of across the board, but primarily it's illicit drugs. And you can't really overdose on marijuana. However, you know, even when I have illicit doses or prescription overdoses, there seems to be always marijuana in the system. So whether you want to attribute that to that being that gateway that people don't want to let loose of, or whatever it is, it seems to be always present.
Yeah, gateway is a lot of what people refer to marijuana as. And I think that the main point from what I can tell as a reporter that you really threw out there is that people need to pay attention to their surroundings and to their loved ones. Because like you said, during COVID, the numbers went down. That's a huge point right there, wouldn't you say?
It absolutely is. And you know what? I find as I go out and talk to groups and what have you, you know, suicide is an uncomfortable topic, and confronting someone about suicide is incredibly uncomfortable. However, being direct and making that confrontation, you know, is the key. And if nothing else, if you're that uncomfortable, simply calling the local police department and having a welfare check done on somebody. I mean, we have this daily where our police departments, our local law enforcement intervene in suicidal subjects, suicidal attempts, ideations. You know, so I mean, they're well versed in it, and just a simple call to dispatch or whatever and saying, listen, someone told me this, and this, and it may be kind of cryptic, but I'm thinking they're not all right. And the police department goes down and does a welfare check, and you know, we make that intervention. And I'm telling you, at least in this county, it happens every single day, several times a day.
Wow. All right. Well, James Whipps, the Natrona County Coroner, we appreciate your time. And for people who want to learn more about what's going on around Wyoming, it's just wyliberty.org and sign up for our newsletter. Thank you, sir.
You bet, Jen. I appreciate you.
You bet.